we get some comments from time to time about
we do,
and I hope you're sitting down, about us being lousy podcast hosts.
We are, well, I mean, I don't understand how anyone can criticize our intro music, for starters.
That's right. There's very little to critique.
I mean, it is beyond reproach.
Yes.
It may be true that our intros are a little terse.
Terse.
Also non-existent.
Well, there's that. But today, I think particularly one of the reasons we get dinged is by not introducing our guests. So, especially because we have two Steves as our guest, I thought we should introduce our guests. So Steve Klabnik is here with us. Steve, welcome.
Hello. Thanks.
Friend of the show, Oxide colleague, and I don't know, generally famous. Is that fair, Steve?
Not just generally famous.
Just some dude. I admin the Discord though. That's a good credential.
But number 23.
23.
Yeah. Most karma all time on the planet.
Yep.
He is part of the, I dare say, the Hacker News aristocracy.
Yeah.
He's a baron on
That's
Hacker
right.
News.
How do you spend all that karma?
Yeah, how do you? Well, it's like I am convinced that there's like a global services for Hacker News that they can't. I think that he hits like 30,000 and like something different happens, and he's just like, we're never gonna get it out of him. There should be like a little twinkle in the eye, being like, no, it's just like, I don't know. Yeah,
I told myself I was quitting at 1,000 points, and I told myself I was quitting at 10,000 points, and then here I am forever later. But I feel like this is not in service of my cause, but I want to be like, actually, I'm number 24 because Paul Graham is hidden off the leaderboards and he has the most. So there's really just an extra one on top. But yeah, I don't feel like I was defending myself very well.
Right, but who's counting, right?
Yeah, exactly. No one's counting.
And other Steve, welcome, other Steve Tuck.
Wow. Was this meant to address the criticism that our intros were bad? Is that, I mean, I'm just trying to understand. Are we trying to? Okay.
No, I'm saying, look, you thought that was bad? Could have been worse.
That's right. Like, okay, we'll do it your way, pal. We will do intros. You'd be begging us to never do another intro again.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Evan. That's very kind.
Yeah, other Steve, I guess. Our CEO and Oxide co-founder, of course.
Bottom 25 karma on Hacker News.
Right,
my karma also was hidden.
That's right. Yet to earn karma on Hacker News, but any day now. So big week last week.
It was big. Yeah, it was. And a little bit surprising, I guess. I mean, I know that's the wrong thing to say. It's like our launch. We shouldn't be surprised, but I was a little surprised. I was surprised. I was just flat out surprised.
I'm surprised by how surprised you are, just because the internet's love us.
That surprises me.
Yeah, there you go. You're just easily surprised. The internet's love. So we announced the first shipment, or the shipment of the first cloud computer. We announced the raise, which is kind of a big deal because it pays all our salaries. And everyone loved it. Like the internet's lit up and people were very interested, and I was unsurprised by their interest.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, it was honestly, it was delightful, honestly. And I guess it's also, there's a little bit. Okay, now this is like, let me just get this out there. Let me just get this odd off my chest. There's a little bit like, why is everyone so surprised that we shipped? You know what I mean? There's a little bit like, it's like, I kind of feel like, it's like when I graduated from college or whatever, it's like people don't need to be that surprised. You can actually like act like you knew it was gonna happen this way. But I think it is. I mean, but of course, truthfully, it is surprising, and everyone's got every right to be surprised.
I mean, we also talked about the entire journey.
We did.
The near misses, the difficult times.
Well, which is the other thing that I did think that. So, okay, Adam, this is the other element of my surprise is that, and we did. There were some stories and journalists who were like, "This company is coming out of deep stealth." It's like aren't we the opposite?
Yeah, oh my goodness! Like how
much less stealth can you be?
We get out here and proverbially, to be clear, open the kimono like every week. We're talking about some esoteric detail of the product. I mean, some problem that nobody's ever talked about, but everyone has had. I mean, I don't know what deep stealth is. I don't know how we can be more the antithesis of that.
Yeah, if anything, we're like TMI. It's like, man, just
enough already.
Like have some problem that you just like keep to yourselves for once. Like experiment with that. Like I just don't need to know everything. It's like kind of gross, honestly.
Go to therapy.
It is therapy. There's the truth of that.
But
But
the
yeah,
podcast is cheaper than therapy.
The podcast is really cheaper than therapy, and that part was. I mean, it was, and obviously there were plenty of folks online who were like, these kind of been talking about what they're doing for a while. But I think it's also easy for us to kind of get in our bubble and realize that like not everyone listens to the podcast and not everyone is following what we're doing. So
everybody's on Hacker News.
Not everyone's on Hacker News. As I try to remind myself, or Yacker News, as my kids call it. Like, you on Yacker News again? It's like,
Burn.
Come to your room.
Or lobsters, as I came to find out.
Or lobsters. When you say came to find out, what does that mean?
I just wasn't aware of
lobsters.
I mean, aware of, but not. I mean, think I had been pointed towards it once or twice before.
Well, and were you? I mean, as long as we're talking about all places in which we were discussed, were you aware of Slashdot?
I mean, yeah, that's.
Oh man, that was definitely
like one step further.
Yeah, I would say never change Slashdot, but they're one step ahead of us in that regard. So, yeah, I mean, I think it might be interesting to go a little bit kind of into the mechanics of the launch. I don't know if people are interested in this, but just in terms of like what's actually involved in what it means to actually engage journalists, for example, because there were a bunch of news stories that came out that we were all kind of coordinated, and it's like, how does that actually happen?
So how long ago did it start? Like, when did you start having conversations with PR and journalists, and how did it roll out?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we started probably in earnest maybe like 2 months ago,
probably several weeks ago,
and we knew that one of the advantages, I think we've said this, we certainly implied it over and over again, but just to say it explicitly, there are a lot of advantages to starting a company later in your career. And Steve, I think you and I have just really appreciated that. And then because we've got a team of veterans that are all, I mean, we're not, we've been around the industry for a long time. And so everybody's got a really big Rolodex. So when it came to like a PR firm, well, we know like who's on that short list, and ran a process, and which is something we emphatically believe in. It's like we always want to run a process for this kind of stuff, and you're kind of selecting a firm like that. I feel like this has happened certainly more often than not, Steve, where we kind of come in with we've worked really well with this firm. Let's run a process and see what happens. And then it's like, you know what? The firm that we love is actually the best firm. So that was actually great.
Because I mean, it's pretty easy to fall, and I think for a lot of companies, to fall into the playbook that is out there, be it a playbook that a set of investors will put in front of portfolio companies.
For sure.
Other folks in the network. And once people have gone down a certain path, they're going to kind of recommend it. Not necessarily if they've had a bad experience, but you will see these kind of just add water playbooks where it's like, insert mega PR firm over here,
or law firm, or
yes.
I mean, it's like when you get these kind of, because you need these professionals.
Well, payroll platform here
right.
is and PR is just another one. And I think there are a lot of companies that aren't sure if they need it or not, and they're told like, no, you definitely need this. And it can be in cases where they haven't even shipped a product, they haven't started on the product, and there's a lot of ways to spend money poorly.
Yeah, and I think that PR. Actually, Steve, you and I have talked about this. It'd be interesting to get your take on it. I think PR is one of those things like sales that's often misunderstood by technologists. They think like, oh, the way I get people to care about my thing is PR. And the way I get my thing sold is sales. And it's like, well, that's part of it. But it's like PR can't make people, a PR engagement or engaging with a journalist can't make people care about something that people don't care about. And
worse than that, I mean, you now are like 2 bridges away from the actual message.
Right.
So if you don't have the right firm just talking to a reporter who, like, there are reporters more diligence than others, and so you're already going to get a version of the story, right? Not your version of the story. And then, if you have the wrong folks in the middle, it can go really sideways.
Well, and in particular, you can have like a bad PR firm could be like, actually, like your story is actually pretty uninteresting. So I told a different story to this reporter.
And
they love it. They are super interested. Like, okay, well, that's also interesting. But that's also yeah, that's not what we do. So you really need a firm that kind of understands who you are as a company, kind of the soul of the company. And we were really lucky with the Launch Squad folks, definitely I've worked with them in previous lives, and they've been really terrific. And in particular, one of the things that I'm part of this, I want to call them out in particular because as they were kind of, absolutely understood Oxide. I love the fact that they had come in having listened to the podcasts, and they, that's always a metric for us is like, have you done your homework on us? Do you understand us? And of course they had. But in particular, they're like, we really see the transformative power of this, and we think strongly that it needs a name. That we need to, like, not a product name, it needs a category name. And we agree. I think it's, and the, and I think it was, their suggestion that, we think you should call this the cloud computer. And does that make sense? And and we were kind of trying it on. One of the things whenever you get something like this, you want to test it out a little bit. And Steve, I remember like they had suggested it in the morning, and I think we had two different potential customer meetings over the course of the day, and we were both kind of trying it on and watching the reaction to it, and it was helping to catalyze it. It was really helping people understand because there's kind of an interesting built-in juxtaposition with cloud computer because we kind of think of the cloud as being something that we don't see that we are that is often the public cloud, and to have this kind of juxtaposition of like, no, this is this physical thing that runs elastic infrastructure.
Yeah, cloud computing is running in someone else's data centers. Cloud computing is something you rent. Cloud computing is this kind of ethereal service layer that you can't see, can't touch. And in fact, you go into the data centers of where these services are running, and there's very quickly understand that there's the big difference in what's been built to support that.
Totally. And so we kind of view this as like, just like you've got a microcomputer and a mini computer and a personal computer and a mainframe computer, this is the cloud computer. So that was something that was, I thought that was a great suggestion on their part. And as the more we were test driving it, the more it made sense to us. So as we were, kind of the way these things work is that you kind of go pitch reporters on a story. And the thing you have to understand, and I think I'm going to speak up on behalf of the Fourth Estate here, because I really think that we have culturally really maligned journalism, and especially in Silicon Valley. There's this idea that journalists are the enemy. My wife's a journalist, and I know a lot of journalists, and I really take issue with that kind of perception. Of course, there's bad journalism, just like there's bad everything. I mean, there are in any profession, you can find the worst of the profession and the best of the profession. But the best of journalism is important and terrific, and has broken huge stories. So that's all the things in the positive category for journalism. One of the challenges with journalism is they are telling a story. And, when you are, we think that there's a big story here in the abstract, but it's a big story. It's not one that's, it's not something that
doesn't fit in 500 words on it.
And it's not like, what's the news? There's a difference between us having a story and having something that's like newsworthy. And so you've got to, couple the larger story with something that is newsworthy. For us, there are kind of two newsworthy elements. Obviously, there's that we are in customer data centers right now, and we are announcing our general availability. And then we're also announcing our fundraising, which was actually wrapped up a while ago, but it's just not something we've talked about. So this was going to be our opportunity to talk about that. And we wanted to be very circumspect about the way we talked about fundraising. Steve, you and I have both seen, and Adam, you too, we've seen plenty of companies that treat fundraising as if it's the objective. And it's like, fundraising is not the objective. Fundraising is something that is necessary on the way to the objective. So you always want to be careful about kind of how you do that. But we also needed to announce it because we hadn't really said anything. On the one hand, our investors like to keep a low profile. On the other hand, not that low profile. Like, can we start talking about this?
So they go hand in glove too. To say that we've got this product in market, it's available now, and we're not some underfunded startup. We've got this war chest. So don't worry, we're going to be able to support this thing and actually bring it to market in the way that your businesses need.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And I think it'd be interesting to know kind of how important. That should be important to. And hopefully that is important. But yeah, Adam, that's a very good point. And that war chest really is, it is essential to know that, like, okay, I am going to be, this thing is early, but there's going to be longevity here. and there are a bunch of investors who really believe in this thing, and they include the very best of institutional capital, institutional venture capital, and some of the very best of corporate venture capital. And there's some just really big backers here, which is terrific. And we obviously really appreciate all those folks. So yeah, Adam, you're right. I mean, it is an important hook. But so as we were kind of thinking about like, all right, so we need to go structure this, launch. Then you get to the kind of like outreach to journalists, and you're trying to tell them what this story is. And of course, like, and Adam, I can't remember if you and I talked about this, but it just sounds a lot like talking to venture capitalists in terms of like, oh, like we're too early for them, or we don't do hardware. I'm like, this sounds like you're talking to VC.
I don't think VC, where the raise is not above a certain level.
So, right, exactly. You're like, okay, all right. So
I'll be writing from the sidelines.
There was some of that, actually. Yeah, exactly. And actually, to their credit, I mean, we've known a lot of journalists over the years. I mean, Adam, I do think it's kind of funny that we knew Ashley Vance, like, when he was a little Sprout, and we were Sprouts. We were all Sprouts together.
I think was that article from like 2004, 2005, something like that.
Yeah, 2004. And that is the very first article ever written by any technology that I'd had any part in was the article that the Register wrote on dtrace and featured a profile of the three of us, of Mike, Adam, and me. And Adam, the three of us sitting in my apartment because we didn't have a better photo of us holding a Scrabble rack, as I recall, selling out dtrace.
I know. When you say it out loud, it sounds weird.
Did it actually physically take that photo in my apartment?
No. Remember, you and I went out drinking with Ashley.
Okay.
And I think it was like Sun Network in China. I know I'm saying this and it sounds like a dream.
Yes, go on. And then what happened in the
and then
was Steve there? Or was I there?
You were there. There were no Steves there. And then the headline was something like "Sun engineers drunk on something or other," and we looked at it and said, "Uh-oh, what is this going to be?" But it turned out to be pretty good.
So so in my dream, Ashley took that photo himself. Or maybe, so you think Bridget took that photo? You think my wife?
I think so. Photo? I think that's right. Yeah, I think that. I mean, I have it in my photo album, so I think that's domestically generated.
Right. So anyway, but Ashley went on to left the Register and went to, I think, the Bloomberg, the New York Times, one of those stops. And he was
at the New York Times. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was at the New York Times, and then wrote what is one of the kind of the important books about Elon Musk, and is now like traveling like he's a television host now of a television show, which is great. So Ashley has become, and I mean the piece he wrote was really good actually. He went deep on it, and he talked to our users, which was great. So but so on the one hand, we've cultivated
that's what good looks like.
That is what good looks like.
That
is what good looks like. Yeah.
Reporter that actually wants to dig deep, understand the people behind it. The first couple people, but like the team and where things have been in the industry for a period of time, why this is new, different, etc. That's what you're after.
Yeah. And I, the fact that he likened me to Ron Popeil, I think have you ever seen like,
I remember you saying that your mom and sister like dined out on that for like months.
Yeah, dined out on my carcass. They dined out on me. Because, and is this in the story or not? Ron Popeil was an infomercial.
Yes.
Salesman.
Yes. I just had to see his picture.
I know I'd like to say I would like to hope I'm in a safe space. Yeah, thank you. Someone has dropped the picture into the chat just in case. There's like, how can this be so bad? Oh, goodness gracious. Okay, so he was a famous pitchman. And in particular, I had purchased a food dehydrator. I know this is not a safe space. You did not know this, Steve?
No.
Yeah. And Adam, you may have forgotten this. Like, why am
I? No, I'm here for this. I know this one.
This is the one that you've left to your heirs to be opened upon.
That's right. My untimely demise. Yes.
Untimely demise, especially if Brian does not have an airtight alibi. So I had bought a food dehydrator. You'd be very surprised to learn that they're basically garbage. So this is when so you watch this infomercial. God, this seems great. And
Problem number one.
okay, and so it's basically just like a cheap piece of plastic that heats that at extremely low temperature dehydrates food. And so I'm like, I'm gonna make raisins. So I go to the grocery store, and this is just embarrassing. Like how this is the part that they don't feature on the infomercial, that you go to weigh the raisins. And I'm like, wow, that's $12 worth of raisins. And of course, I'm like, I have just paid for the water in the grapes. I bought the grapes, and it is the water that I have paid for. And I'm now going to go dehydrate these grapes and turn them into raisins. I would like to say that I made the world's most expensive best raisins. And yes, if you're wondering, am I the right? Are we just got the Oxide launch? Should we talk about raisins? We're talking about both.
They're related.
Number
Just wait for it.
Startup number 6042 is finally an integrated, well-designed, top-to-bottom dehydrator.
Food dehydrator. Truthfully, the bigger problem with the dehydrator is that ultimately you're paying for the water when you go.
Only they were max scale, everything would be better, but they're just not. So.
That's right. So anyway,
so when you deploy a traditional rack, what is the net you're left with at the end? Not too abrupt of a transition.
Too abrupt. So Ashley had written this great story about us, and this is like, on the one hand, we've like got this great Rolodex over the years, but if you on the other hand, like Ashley is now world famous, and a bunch of the other journalists we've worked with are just like either too prestigious or retired or both. So it's like, well, all right, that's not very helpful. So
sorry, all your friends are too good, Brian. It's very rough.
It's very rough. I'm glad that you understand my dilemma, Steve, about how difficult it is to be. So it was tough. I mean, honestly. And so we, as we were, trying to find folks, and and Launch Squad did a terrific job reaching out to a bunch of folks. But anyway, you get to the point where, like, all right, so we got you kind of try to sell an exclusive, but that can be a hard sell when even though we would love someone to really dig deep. But so then you do what's called an embargo. So you say, like, all right, so we've got this news, and the news is under embargo. And you got a press release that you write, and the press release is going to go out on the wire. And there's a couple of different wire services, there's PR news wires. There are a bunch of them where you're basically pushing your press release onto a press release news wire. And now that is available for anyone to write a story on. And it is a press release is like for the press. It's so
an embargo is pretty well recognized.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, they don't have to live by it, but most journalists will adhere to it. And it is effectively just so someone is not preempting the news.
That's right. And so when you have someone under embargo, yeah, they're always going to honor it. I mean, that's just like, I guess they don't legally have to, but a reporter is basically going to honor an embargo. So we kind of knew that was happening. And then once you kind of commit to that date, it's like, all right, you're basically locked in for the date. And that's going to be, and we knew we were going to write a blog entry that kind of accompanied the press release.
And setting that was about 2 weeks before.
Yeah.
Like starting to give reporters the opportunity to write under embargo. And then reporters will then reach out and want to do interviews.
Right. Yeah.
Have a bunch of Q&A back and forth. But once we had set that, the timing of that was a bit early.
Yeah. So why is it at 3 a.m.? Where's that number come from?
That is 6 a.m. Eastern. So, and that is just
why 6 a.m. Eastern.
Well, that's just so they can.
Even that seems early.
Well, so the particular reason for that, Launch Squad explained, was that a bunch of financial service newsletters go out at 6 a.m. Eastern. So if you want to be included with these like financial trade rags that go out, you want to be launching it at 6 a.m. Eastern, right, which I did not know.
Just in general, if you want a reporter to have a story that's going to publish on that morning, you want to give them, you don't want to have like a 9 a.m. embargo where they have to be like, well, shit, the story's going to go live at 8:30. And that would be jumping the embargo by half an hour. Like you just want to give them like, all right, so it's going to be, 6 a.m., 3 a.m. on here on the West Coast, but we don't necessarily need to be up for it. So we kind of have that locked and loaded. And then we know we need to write a blog entry for it. And so we're kind of noodling that. It was very catalytic to how we were at an event that actually one of our investors was hosting. And they, in particular, a counterpart, they were having this conference. And they, it'd be great is if you had the Oxide rack at this conference.
Where was it being held?
In San Francisco.
No, but like, what kind of a building was this?
Are you just asking
Was it just an office building, or what kind of? Was it a stadium?
I mean,
Is
it was in a
5/1? Like, what was the
Yeah.
zoning of
What?
it was on?
Yeah, are you trying to like narc me out here? I mean, it's like
It was an illegal establishment. It was a church, and it was a pretty tricky logistics endeavor to get the thing in there.
and to be clear, we did not plug the rack in. And indeed, we took what we called the showcase rack, which got mechanical blanks and is a little bit like less weight. But
It turned out well.
it was great. I think we were all like a little bit skeptical. It's like, why do you really want to have the whole rack there? It's not small, it's big. And it's going to go to a church. And it's like
well, and in particular, so this particular investor, they work very closely with CVC's corporate venture capital teams. And so the folks that attend their annual investor conference are almost all Fortune 500 companies, which is definitely a demographic that is good to have exposure to the product that we're building.
Yeah.
And so they made the case very, very easily. And getting it in and out was a little tricky, but and I don't think we will find the rack in as luxurious a location ever again.
no, it was
impressive.
It was impressive. Kind of, it was like surrounded by like tapestries, or it was very
Velvet.
And it you had that afternoon light going in. It was definitely there was a little bit of holiness around it. I gotta say, a little bit of holy rack. But so the reason I bring all this up is because at the event, there was, at these events you get a lot of like very buttoned down kind of corporate venture capitalists, and then there was always a couple of wild cards in the deck. And one of the wild cards was someone who's run a consumer brand that you've heard of, but was a bit flamboyant, the right word. So if there were one person at this conference dressed to go to a club, it was this guy.
In every way imaginable.
In every way imaginable. Like if you put that in your head, you basically have the right visual. And so like a little bit of a
extraordinarily caffeinated,
maybe generous, like not, I mean, at least caffeinated, caffeinated plus.
That's right.
And so I was like kind of waiting for food or whatever. And I ended up basically talking to this guy, and I'm thinking like, man, this guy is not, he's a direct to consumer person who looks like he just got kicked out of the club. I mean, it's like, this is not going to be, and it turns out like, do not judge a book by its cover, because I kind of got half a sentence into what Oxide's doing. And he's like, God, like, oh man, I got so many memories dealing with Knicks and dealing with this and the other.
Cables everywhere.
And you order a cable, you get the wrong cable, you get a different wrong crossover, and every vendor's pointing fingers at one another, and you're just trying to get the software up. And I'm like, where am I right now?
And by the way, just to set that, I mean, the audience generally at this event, if you polled 10 of them and asked them just what like AWS is or what cloud computing is, would blank stare you.
Totally. Yeah. So the fact that this guy was like, had pain with Knicks
in a data center
was definitely, let alone cabling. So it's definitely surprising. I'm like, well, so I start explaining Oxide, obviously. And he's like, terrible name. You have to change the name. I'm like, okay, well, okay. Okay. We're not gonna do that. That one's off the table. Like, let's, and I'm like, actually, let me go show you the rack. And so I took him kind of back into the church and showed him the rack. And it was really interesting because this guy was caffeinated plus, was very had technical experience doing this, but also really understood kind of like what the differentiators would be. And kind of he really felt like I had undersold it apparently to him. He was and readily acknowledged that the branding was like it's like, yeah, this looks sick, this is good. But he, in particular, he got to the back of the rack and he's looking at the cabled backplane, and he's just like, "Are you kidding me? Look at this thing! Like this is so he's really kind of very exuberant, which is great. As he's kind of going through the things that were just mind bending to him, and so like in particular, he's talking about the cabling and the boxes. Like, how many boxes is this thing shipping? I'm like, well, it ships in one large crate. It's like, you got to say that on your website. That's got to be the topic. So then the blog entry was in no small part inspired by kind of caffeinated plus. This is actually later in the conversation. He would later reveal that he may have been on things additional to caffeine. may have offered us to indulge Steve and I both to beer. No, thank you.
Strange.
Yeah, no, thank you on that one. But but thank you very much for.
I just dropped a picture of it into the.
Oh, did you? Oh, nice, you did. Yeah,
The long shot.
The long shot that is. I know. It's just,
I mean, it does look photoshopped.
it does. It is not
A little
photoshopped.
bit.
Yeah,
I mean, it looks extraordinarily photoshopped. That is an actual picture taken. And then there were some other photos that came across in that setting that were look prom worthy because of the background.
And now Adam's thinking like, oh, great. Now I have to like make this the image of the podcast, or you got to make me go in and do video editing again.
That's right.
Adam,
It's the image. I got it already. I'm also trimming this out, so we're fine.
Yeah. There you go. We're gonna trim out this whole discussion. Never happened. So that was kind of the motivator for getting into, as because I think that realizing that we needed to speak about this really from that perspective of.
And by the way, it should be stated this person is a pretty good marketer.
No, for sure, absolutely.
So they have people spending hundreds of millions of dollars on canned water,
right?
Of which we may be drinking right now.
Right,
Pretty
good.
tasty.
It's good canned water. Good canned water.
But he had some good suggestions.
He had some really good suggestions, and I think that and just in general, I think the just capturing and what we tried to capture in the blog entry was the what we have heard over and over again from folks who, when you see this is not what you are accustomed to. This does not look like a stack of commodity gear. This looks very different, and it looks very different in a bunch of different ways. And so we kind of tried to capture a bunch of that, and talked about things like the cabling and the fans and the fact that it is not something that you're cobbling together in the software. But it's like, I also feel that try as we might, we can't capture the whole thing. So we're trying to capture some of those first impressions. I think they told me to keep it to 1,000 words. I think I definitely did not do that, but it wasn't, it's only over by a couple. Exactly.
Close.
But so that was the kind of the genesis of the blog entry. And I actually think so. There are people in the chat being like, hold on, let me just get this straight. You, Brian Cantrell, are complaining about someone being excitable and seemingly, and it's like, yes, that is yes. You're just going to have to like take me at my word here that this is, I think, and Steve, you were talking to both of us at the same time. I think you can confirm that he was a faster talker.
Yes.
It was more amped.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And
Wow.
just absolutely zero off switch. So there's
are we talking about me or him right now?
I'm so sorry. he also didn't really have an off switch, but no, he did not get, there was not a room to get a word in edgewise. And there were folks there that definitely were, kind of trying to break in and.
No, you're just not. It was. So yeah, maybe this is what it's like talking to me. But it's like, hey, look, it's exhausting. Okay, you all have my sympathy. It was a lot, but he was also right about a lot of things. So, anyway, so it's fun to get it out there. So we had the blog entry written, and so we're gonna turn the key on that one at 3 a.m. Pacific. We
have folks in the UK that easily could turn said key.
Yeah.
Would be later in the day.
Yes.
Instead, I think you were up at 3 a.m.
That sounds like a criticism.
No,
just an observation.
Right. I was like, look, if I wake up naturally, I wake up, and I just happened to wake up at 2:55. I don't know. My body knew. My body knew it was time. I don't know. I got some some hacker news, I don't know, some hormones or something. So got that thing kicked at 3, got the blog entry up, and I mean, so Steve, so Claudia, do you? Because I do not submit any of our stories to Hacker News. I always want that to happen kind of organically. Is that your? I mean, no. as someone who's a top 25,
I absolutely post everything that I believe should be posted as soon as
do you really?
I see it. Yeah. Well, it's not as soon as you see it. I think that the correct time to post in general is at 9 a.m. PST. And that is because you get the people who are just showing up to the office who don't want to start doing any work, and they're drinking coffee and they're reading Hacker News. And you get the people on the East Coast who are at lunch who do not want to do any work and are looking at Hacker News. And I think that is meant to get the most chance of being upvoted to the front page.
Of being upvoted to the front. And so just for those of you who do not spend as much time your lives online, you're living much better lives than Steve and I are. So with Hacker News, it's like you don't really control it, right? I mean, it's going to get upvoted whether if it's kind of compelling. If it is, I have had this happen where I submit things that I think are super interesting that get zero attention, and then if they kind of don't survive in that kind of that new bin, they will just never see any more close to the front page. And on some of those, they will actually, the folks at Hacker News will say, like, hey, this is really technically interesting. This is important to the audience. So we will later give this an artificial boost, which is great. So that's always an option on stuff like this. But yeah, Steve, generally I'm with you. Like 9 a.m. Pacific is a good time to do things. I would say 3 a.m. Pacific is not the time I would pick. So
yeah, I had asked on our pull request on the draft of the blog post. I was like, oh, by the way, when's this going out? And Ben said, oh, 3 a.m. Pacific time on the 26th. And I was like, oh, cool. Because like Ben's a funny guy and he makes jokes sometimes. And I thought that he was like joking about it going out at 3 a.m. I was like, oh, that's really funny. And I just didn't actually follow up. And then like I wake up and I was like, oh man, I'm still pretty sleepy. And then I'm like, let me check the computer. And I was like, wait, holy crap, it's already there. There's a bunch of, and then I was like, oh, Ben wasn't joking. Actually, it's been up for 3 hours. And like immediately got involved. But yes,
it was not sarcasm. Yeah,
it was very funny. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, I didn't submit it. But as we're kind of getting everything else out there, because you got to get like all the social posts out there. So I'm posting to Twitter, and I'm realizing that like, you know what? I don't have the Blue Sky creds for the Oxide account.
Yeah.
And I kind of don't care. I think this is like, oh, Blue Sky. This is like, like your true social network is the one you check after an earthquake. And the fact that like I couldn't even be bothered I'm like, sorry, Blue Sky. I don't know. I'll deal with you later. Blue Sky's got to open up completely to the public. Is the problem with Blue Sky? It's still, I'm still optimistic about Blue Sky. But I did get the post up certainly on Twitter and on Mastodon. I mean, I think it's super interesting. And Steve, I don't know if you found this for your stuff as well. For tech audiences broadly have moved to Mastodon, and the engagement on Mastodon is better. It's like you almost want. I mean, so really important to get up on Mastodon, and then it is really important to get it up on what is rapidly becoming the third most important social network. I cannot believe I'm going to say this. LinkedIn. LinkedIn is like, I feel like the big story about the fact that Musk has flown Twitter into the side of the mountain is that LinkedIn has become actually way more relevant. The content is better. The engagement is good. They don't have and now that said, like LinkedIn has got all the same problems that LinkedIn has always had.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
LinkedIn has old. What is it?
LinkedIn's
all things
still
open.
LinkedIn.
Everybody that came up to our booth was like, hey, can I connect with you on LinkedIn? And like the first time it happened, I like laughed and I was like, oh yeah, sorry, I don't like have that. And the second time it happened, I was like, what the fuck is up with LinkedIn? And then the third time I was like, am I gonna have to re-sign up for LinkedIn? Like, why is everybody so interested in LinkedIn now? But yeah, maybe we're very old.
And I think it is because it is beginning to serve, Twitter was serving this kind of professional capacity for a lot of folks. And I think it is LinkedIn and Mastodon kind of between the two of them. Anyway, so I was like, God, man, can I get this LinkedIn post up there before kind of get it? Make sure to post it. And we actually a lot of great engagement on LinkedIn.
Facebook for professionals. It's a good descriptor.
It for sure is. And
with all the trash,
some of the benefit. Right. That's right.
I heard
it's
Nextdoor called
Facebook.
Oh, good.
No, just that it sadly is still an easy way for your extended friends and family to keep up with things that are happening. When you've got kids, like it's easy to have a vector where it doesn't all have to be telephone calls and texts. And Facebook's terrible, but it serves that purpose.
It does.
LinkedIn similarly is this place where you've got, your connections from your professional career, and it is a place where you can update people.
And I think, and then the quality of engagement has gone up as Twitter, because you have, and I know Steve right now, you can't see his eyes, but he's just like, I hear your words, but I can't actually process that. It actually is the engagement is better because I think it's replaced Twitter. So we get it up on LinkedIn, bunch of good engagement. And by the time I get all those up there and I like spend, I don't know, 10 seconds trying to find the Blue Sky credentials and I'm not able to do it. I was like, oh my God, this is already on Hacker News and it's the number 2 story. And I'm like, wow, okay, I guess we're coming in hot there. And then I like click reload and it's the number 1 story. I'm like, all right, well, here it is. It's like at this point, 3:30 in the morning Pacific. And I want to go back to bed. I do not want to sit here and, but for those of you, I'm sure, anytime you've got, the internet talking about something you've been a part of, it is hard to not, click reload on it. It's hard not to stare at it. And
it's also important with Hacker News, like for people who don't spend their lives posting on Hacker News. First of all, congratulations. And second of all, like the initial comments can really set the tone for like everything else. And so it's like semi-critical to like shape the conversation in the way that you want it to go early on in the thread's history, because like otherwise it could go to like literally anything. And like,
I think you're totally right, Steve. And I think that you and I have both seen this, where if somebody sets the tone poorly, then it's going to attract a lot of negativity, and people just aren't going to engage with it, because it's going to be, because often if people actually want to engage with something positive about it, or they got questions, or they want to get kind of technical answers, and they can just see that's like, all right, this is just a mess in the comments, they'll just walk away from it. So it's really important to get kind of an initial comment out there that people can kind of latch onto, and and upvote if they so feel it. So you really want to, as Janet is saying in the chat, you kind of set those thread vibes early. But look at the thread vibes are good. I thought the thread, I'm like, all right, this is all good. This is all basically tacky. This is nothing is too far off the rails here. And whenever you got someone saying kind of something nutty, you've got someone else coming in and answering them. So it's like, all right, this is good. And I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go back to bed. Actually, which is not something I would have thought that I was biologically capable of doing. It's like I am actually going to sleep with us as the number one story in Hacker News.
Being up at 3 a.m.
Yeah,
mildly surprising. Going back to bed. Extremely surprising.
I'm good.
And so surprising that I don't know. Like, did it really happen that way? Maybe.
Right, exactly. Maybe not. Yeah, as far as you know.
That's right.
Yes. Look, I may have just been clicking reload and keeping a low profile, telling everyone that I went to sleep, just to. But it was good. So the comments are good, and so I think we want to like get in to the. Yeah, that's right. Someone was saying in the chat, like, okay, he actually is aging. I assure you, I am aging, and if you would like, I can do my children would be happy to point out all the elements in which I'm aging. My 19-year-old can outrun me, which is very, I don't know, Adam,
that's tough. No.
Better not be hanging out with him in a bear anytime soon, or you're going to be in trouble.
That's exactly right. I know. I need to make sure that I take my younger children with me, who I can still outrun, fortunately. But so there was a bunch of questions in there. I think that and then a bunch of news stories. So I think we want to kind of, the news stories, I think, were less surprising. I mean, I think that they were, and especially for folks who have been following Oxide, I don't think you're going to find any big reveals. One thing I did want to, but I thought maybe we could go through some of the big themes on the questions and things that we did not. So when we first shipped in July, end of June, July, we did a podcast where we kind of answered questions. And so I would definitely refer people to that. I mean, because we answered a bunch of questions there. I don't want to go through and kind of, because there were certainly some of the same questions.
Totally.
But there are also some new ones and some important ones. One of the things that I was surprised by, and I would love to get everyone else's take on it, I was definitely surprised by the number of people who are like, this is not cloud. Cloud has to be rented. Like, that's part of the definition of cloud. Like, okay. And I think I did see this comment before I went to bed. Maybe this is what was able to send me to bed with some confidence, is someone had quoted the NIST definition for cloud. And this is, you're like, oh man, I hope NIST has got the right definition here. I hope you hold your breath a little bit, like, ooh, this maybe we don't
like this link. I go to bed.
Exactly. And the NIST definition, actually, as with many things, NIST is really good. Actually, the NIST definition of cloud computing is like right on, spot on. I mean, a really good definition.
You have it?
Yeah, Adam dropped it in the channel. And it is just. Cloud computing is a model for enabling convenient, on-demand network access to a shared pool of configurable computing resources that can be rapidly provisioned and released with minimal management effort or service provider interaction. That is so
well done, NIST.
Well done, NIST. And whatever technologist, I mean, obviously there are technologists either at NIST or friends of NIST that help write that definition. And I know you may feel that your job is thankless. We'd like to thank you here at Oxide, because I thought that was a really good definition. What do you think about that?
I think it's really good. I think I'm tempted to start a talk with NIST defines cloud computing to be.
I was going to joke about a best man speech that starts off at a wedding reception.
NIST defines love as but I think that was really good. So so that was great. And then so that comment, that kind of like angle of like, no, this is not cloud has to be rented. That just got absolutely like launched into oblivion. It was really great. And then there was like one of the comments in reply to this is like, yeah, sorry, you're just gonna get downvoted here because like you're just wrong. Like nobody agrees with your definition, basically. So it was good. Maybe I think that was the lullaby that I needed.
There you go. That off to bed.
Off to bed for me. This is great.
Reception was good. Do you want to get into I pulled out some of the comments. Do you want to get into some of those from Hacker News?
Well, so one of I do want to like just tack directly into one of the themes that because I think that something we saw a decent amount was like, hey, how much does it cost? Like the fact that like their pricing is contact sales is like, oh, okay, yeah, I've seen this before.
When that came up with reporters as well.
Yes.
Because obviously reporters want to get as much tangible information that they can go right on. And so we had that question also posed as we were doing the interview process.
Yes. And one reporter in particular was like asking us about pricing. And you gave them the answer that's the honest answer, which is
it depends.
It depends. People do not want to hear the it depends answer. Like, oh, it depends. You're being I see.
Yeah.
You're being evasive.
I mean,
I got
because
you.
usually that means it depends on how much money you have. Like how big is your budget? That's how much the price is.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What's your timeline?
What's your
budget?
Right.
No, it depends because while this is a rack scale computer, there are things that are variable. So one is the number of sleds that you have in this rack scale computer. You can buy it complete with 32 sleds. You can initially install it with fewer than 32 sleds. And we've had customers that have needed to do that for reasons like we want to get this in under a certain power footprint. And then we want to expand it as we see how much we're using. Or we have a budget limitation that is going to expire. And so we want to get it in and then be able to grow it from there. And so in that case, when someone is getting it in for, fewer sleds than 32, the system itself can come in below $1 million, which is what I told him.
Right. It is what you told him.
He didn't print it.
He didn't print. He wasn't very interested in that. I guess he's like, no,
because and then I said, and it can be above $1 million if you're configured a certain way, because you also have a decision you can make about how much DRAM, how much memory you want per sled. We've got 16 DIMM channels. You can have half populated or fully populated, so you can have half terabyte or terabyte of DRAM per sled, and so you've got these kind of two dials. And he was definitely not interested in the nuance. He's like, what is the price?
Right. And so that was, I'm definitely getting from the chat, we will never again say contact sales. Obviously, contact sales is clearly all the antibodies come out. We'll need to find some synonym for reaching out to sales so we can give you, I don't know, that.
That
it's tough.
That is very fair.
It's a fair criticism. So I think that. And I think people, you want to kind of know what the price is, but which is important. And we obviously need to have a little configurator on there so you can kind of configure it and you can then see with it and get an actual quote, which I think is important. I think that
especially because what folks want to do is they want to be able to kind of put together a comparison.
They want to put together a comparison. And, totally reasonable.
Right now you can go to Dell's website and you can configure a server that has the same components. So you would put in like 10 3.4 terabyte NVMe drives and 16 16 DIMMs of 64 gig memory.
I like the way you are instructing the future listener to be like, did you get that? 10? No, not 5. You need to put in 10 if you want to get the accurate price. 16, get the numbers right.
You may find that you can't go higher than 8, but you, and then, an AMD processor. And if you're doing that, and then if you're adding things like, for example, VMware, it will accurately flag you that you need not one VMware license, you need 2 if you've selected more than 32 CPUs. But anyway, it'll error out and then you can kind of correct that and it will give you your final total. And I think it's a pretty eye-opening experience because it just helps folks get a good sense of what these things cost.
And we I think it's fair to say we had a reporter who will remain nameless, who made a bit of a mistake and didn't do exactly what you prescribed, and instead got a quote for 32 CPUs.
When you say
Like
CPUs, you mean like a server with 32 CPUs?
I'm glad you asked.
Okay.
No, I mean 32 CPUs, unsocketed CPUs.
Like a
Like off
bag
the
of
back of
chips. Yeah.
Yes, a bag of chips. Right. I mean, 32. It's like actually you might be surprised to learn that what you just ordered can actually go into a backpack. It's actually it's a heavy backpack, but it's basically a backpack. And the number that you get is of course a lower number because you've priced out a car against the cost of the tires. So we did correct that. We encouraged the reporter to do and maybe walked the reporter through the way to actually get a proper comparison.
There are fewer and fewer people today that want to then make their own PCB and do their own assembly, and
Right.
Right. buy a bag of network cards and DRAM, and so yeah, but again,
We got it corrected though.
got it corrected, got to a good spot.
Which is important. And in fact, it got that obviously and configured on properly. It got a kind of a proper price comparison. And I think that anyone that does a proper price comparison is going to discover like, wow, okay, actually, this is actually very price competitive. This is not. So we did not want to be, we're a very transparent company, and I think that we can certainly understand how people felt we were being evasive by contact sales, but that is not what we were trying to do at all.
No, it used to be. I think the original link was sign up for a spot in line, and maybe we should revert to that.
Yeah. Or just
or contact us, or
I don't know.
There's plenty of better ways to present.
We got to find a way to phrase that. Anyway, we're not trying to be evasive with the pricing, so we'll.
No, not at all. Because again, there's a bunch of public information about like what does it cost today to put the equivalent amount of CPU, DRAM, storage into a rack, a commercial rack out there, and then warranty it for a couple of years, and then pay for software to be able to manage it and organize it. And as we had customers tell us early on, folks that were running data center infrastructure, it's like, yeah, a rack full of gear with all the software licensing over 3 years costs us, I think the last one we heard from someone was like $2.1 million.
Right.
And so we're going to get the numbers out there more broadly. And with this particular reporter, we had just shared like can be just under $1 million, can be over $1 million, and depends on the configuration.
Yeah, and I think what you can questions in the chat of like, hey, how hard would it be for you all to do a configurator? And the answer is not hard, and that's something we need to go do. So
no, and we did a bunch of the groundwork on that because as you can imagine, when you're going through things like a fundraise, investors want to understand, well, what does this look like compared to someone running a bunch of infrastructure on AWS EC2?
Yeah, right.
And so we went through, and there's a lot of things you need to do a fair and accurate comparison. You start with pick an arbitrary EC2 instance or a couple of them, and then figure out how you could pack that into some subset of the capacity in the rack. Then you have to fairly do some balance of on-demand and reserve pricing.
Right. Which is a total, that is a bit of a trick, right? Because there's a big difference between on-demand and reserve pricing.
Huge.
And so, this is where, all kudos to AWS and their ability to execute. Yep. But the fact that reserve pricing is so much cheaper shows you that there's real hardware behind you. Because like Amazon needs to buy stuff to run this stuff on, and they're going to give you, if you want a true, completely elastic, I'm going to give you zero forward visibility to how much compute I'm going to use, and I want to use as much as I possibly can. One, you're going to find that there are actually real limits, and you go to provision. You're not going to be provisioning 10,000 VMs. You're going to be provisioning quite a bit less than that before you get kind of you need to call us. But you will also be absolutely paying for that. And you'll be paying a lot for it. So that, and thank you very much for those in the chat for helping us brainstorm on ways to be transparent about our pricing. So, and I like folks like, don't forget like the cost of the power to indicate which is true. So another thing that kind of came up, and Adam, I don't know if you saw something I definitely went back and forth on a little bit on the Hacker News comments in a very good way, but about the fans, and about the noise. and why the noise is actually representative of much bigger things. That it's actually like we weren't actually trying to design this to be for its acoustics. That was an artifact of the way we built this thing and took a clean sheet of paper.
Yeah, the fans are representative of what I think are a part of the value proposition that we don't talk enough about. That we do talk about the fans, and I know you love your 80 millimeter fans, but the impact to power consumption is pretty wild. I mean, really significant.
It is, and right now, and I think the fans. Okay, look, I know people in the chat are being like, "Oh my God,
not again the fans, right?"
Oh God, will the senator from 80 millimeter fans please yield? The fans we have not been talking enough about are the fans on the AC power supplies on the 1Us and 2Us. I feel like those fans I have not. We have
come back in 10 minutes if you want to skip the power supplies.
Okay, we're done. So wow. Okay. Anyway, that's the end of that. No, these because you have these little teensy tiny fans in the AC power supplies, and those things are also screaming. And this is where you get to and actually we did not factor that into our calculus we just kind of knew we were going to use a DC bus bar, but we did the calculus anyway. But I think that the power consumption for the fans in the power supply is something you've got zero visibility into. I don't know of a single power supply that like an AC power supply that you're going to put in a commodity server that's going to give you that visibility. All right, everybody, that was a fast 10 minutes.
So how significant?
2% comparison. It's good.
So how big? I mean, how much do these fans draw? Like, what's the power difference?
It's on the order of 20 to 30% of the rack. So we are, so we say 2%. It's actually not 2%.
We say under
2% of our rack.
2% is super conservative. It is like pretty far under 2%.
And here we go again. But it is. But so these 1U fans can take up the combined fans 20% of the power of the rack times n number of racks. This ends up being a huge inefficiency, and getting that from 20+% to under 2% just means way more density.
That's right. I think so. Steve, this is an important point you're making, because it's like people are like, well, I don't care about my power bill that much. It's like that may be true, but you actually do care about the density. You actually do care about the amount of compute you can put in per unit, per square foot, per tile in your DC. And that's what this goes to. It goes to density. This all goes back into compute, and you want it to be used for compute and networking and DRAM. Another question that came up, I should say, we are going to be doing a kind of a series, because someone was asking about you guys need to do a blog post on the fan power. I can't tell if that's like so I don't have to read it as opposed to like listen to it. I can't this is kind of like when I tell my mom that she should write a letter to the municipal authority that she's so upset about. It's like so I'm not sure I'm being told to write a letter.
Like an Oxide OnlyFans that just posts pictures of the fans would do pretty well. I'm just saying. Still.
Oh
wow.
Man!
While we're talking about social networks, quote unquote.
Wow, Pandora's box has been opened. That is so dangerous. Yeah, exactly. Some ideas I should not have heard. That's Steve. I love. Have you been sitting on that for how long? Yeah, you've been sitting on that one.
I feel like that joke has been made several times, but
I don't think so.
Maybe not in this call anyway. But like, it's fine. It's fine. Anyway.
Okay. But I'm just kind of blown. Yeah, I need to recover from the OnlyFans. But we're going to have a series of blog posts, and we actually want to do episodes of Oxide and Friends where we go into some of the stuff in detail. We'll save the fans for just the blog post, but we want to talk about a bunch of different elements of the rack. And go into detail there. We obviously got an idea of the detail that we want to hit, but if people want to see particular details, we'd love to hear from you. Make sure to get an episode teed up, and make sure to get a discussion on it. So, and a blog post. So Adam, what were some of the other big themes that you?
Yeah, some of the other themes tacking into value proposition. I think that there were a bunch of commenters of the form, hey, can't I just get all this stuff from Supermicro and load it up with OpenStack and do it all myself? And then a bunch of other folks saying, let me know how that's working out for you. And How do you get all this thing working together? And you've got 6 different vendors in the mix. And when there's a problem, how's that work out?
And even further than let me know how that works out for you, but you had folks that were going in and saying, let me tell you my story, and then telling their own stories about unboxing and assembling and integrating and troubleshooting. And back to the comment of this person that was at the VC event, it's like you've done all this and then you find that you have the wrong rail. One wrong set of rails sets you back another 5 weeks.
Right.
And even once you get to that point of integrating all the 5 vendors together, then Adam, to your point, folks commenting in there like, well, then what are you going to do when you have a problem? Who are you calling? And which of the vendors are you finally pinning down that aren't pointing at the other one? And I think it was great for us not having to chime in and others chiming in.
And
experiences.
I did like there was someone in the Hacker News comments who, speaking about Dell in particular, said that, and Ryan is quoting this, that Dell is a single vendor that will diagnose and fix all of your hardware issues. Just like full sentence, no further qualifiers.
Yeah.
Which I mean, this is a troll in the oldest sense.
You could practically hear the guffaws and the replies to that.
Well, I love the fact that Steve Klebnik, you said that you were with a friend of yours or an acquaintance of yours who has deployed like large amounts of Dell at like a social event, and you're like reading him Hacker News comments just to get him like guffawing.
Yeah. I like one of my neighbors works for the city, and they have a pretty large deployment of like VxRail apparently in whatever his department is. And yeah, I was just like, yeah, dealing with that support is absolutely terrible.
Right. It is. It's not great. And so, and you get these fingers pointed at one another. And I think that, with OpenStack, it's OpenStack's not a product, which is part of its problem. And back in the day, as kind of more and more companies were throwing their lot in with OpenStack, one of the questions that you get is like, well, how are you going to go compete with all these hundreds of companies now that are working on OpenStack? And it's like, are you like, can you hear yourself? I mean, the last time that hundreds of companies cooperated on something and had a successful result is like World War II. I just don't think, I mean, like you can't have one company do something without getting in its own way, let alone like, oh no, don't worry. We have many different organizations that are, it's like, okay, yeah.
I really appreciated how much folks got the value proposition of one entity responsible for this whole thing, from networking and CPU and virtualization and all this stuff. Because I also think that that's a huge part of why we built it the way we built it. Why we are running the operating system we're running, why we're building our own service processor, our own embedded OS. It all comes from that desire to support this whole thing, this whole box full of lots of heterogeneous components that we are integrating.
That's right, Adam. And I think that, in every one of those decisions was happening not because we were like electing to do something on our own or go our own way, but because we had specific concrete experience where the inability to kind of control both sides of this led to a suboptimal, to put it mildly, experience.
Well, and I think the thing that was great to hear come through in some of those responses in Hacker News was, a vendor that is saying, hey, this vendor will support fill in the blank their product. And folks being like, yeah, well, if I could have diagnosed that it lived in their product already, wouldn't that have been nice?
Yeah.
And instead being in a position where, someone was saying like, whatever issue I have sitting above this entire stack, I can throw at Oxide. And that's true.
It's true.
It could be an issue in your database. It could be an issue wherever it starts from. We're going to go run that to ground. Adam, to your point, because we control the whole stack. And because we've been on the other side of the table in that helpless position where people are kind of bouncing you all over the place, we will. Like, we're going to take ownership of every one of those issues. And it's not as sexy as a speed or a feed, but it's folks that have actually run infrastructure on-prem. Hearing them come through and telling those stories, it means as much as any product feature you can have.
And it's really, really important to us. I think it does kind of hit on two other themes that kind of came up in the Hacker News comments. One of which, and this already also came up in the chat. So it's like, did you all forget to make the Helios repo public? And the answer to that is basically yes.
And so what is Helios?
Sorry about that. What's that?
And do you want to describe what Helios is?
Yeah, Helios is, so it's our Illumos derivative. The Illumos derivative itself is actually all public. That's in the St. Louis branch of our Illumos fork. So that is actually, the meat there is all actually public. And as I kind of was replying to that on a Hacker News comment, someone else was like, how was I supposed to find that? I'm like, yeah, that's not on you. You were not supposed to find that. That was like, so sorry about that. But we'll be rectifying that. It just needs to be, there's a small amount of cleanup that needs to be done. Like we do need to add a license in there before but the actual Helios repo really just contains the things that kind of point to these other repos. It's not actually it kind of pulls it together and builds it. But it is very important for us, and a big differentiator for us is the fact that it's all open. So from top to bottom, we really have wanted from the beginning to get it all out there. And one of the things that actually something that people didn't ask us about. That I think maybe a question we kind of, what's that, Steve?
Oh, nope. Sorry. You're in the middle of the thing. I'm going to try to interrupt you. St. Louis is actually also not public. So saying that it's on a branch on St. Louis means that you could find it. Like that's also not open, actually.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. Yeah. We'll rectify that. Yeah, exactly. But one of the questions that we would ask of ourselves is like, hey, what have you learned from your first couple of customers? Like, what has been the experience been, and how have things, you've got some kind of some theories as you are getting this product in the market, and how did those theories work out? And I would say that we've got a lot of proof points of like, yeah, we've got. We were having one tricky problem with a customer just with the necessary kind of cert generation that was not actually like it was at. I mean, if you want to get super technical about it, wasn't necessarily an Oxide problem, but like was definitely a problem. Like getting like we needed to pull this together, to get it up and running. And the line that we heard was like, with VMware, I feel like I would be kind of like on my own right now. Even though it's like, no, we're not going to be, it's really important.
Well, not just on my own. It was like, while you all were troubleshooting this, which to be clear, this is because we integrate into someone's identity and auth provider. So we don't try to replace that. We leverage like the SAML provider that they, or the fee that they use for identity and auth. And so they have to give us certificates. And in the process of getting that up, we had them on our troubleshooting call. They're like, it's so refreshing that I was allowed to just sit back and kind of listen to how you're working through this problem. With VMware, I would have been like handed an SDK and they would have disappeared, or I would have been, sent to a, online support system, and it just, weeks later, maybe I emerged from something, and it was good to hear, and having the ability for folks for that is open source, which we are quickly resolving to get all of it out there. Another comment was we were talking with this customer about they had some priority work that they wanted us focused on, and then there was another issue that was low priority, and we just were updating them like, hey, by the way, we're still working on this other thing too, and they're like, oh, I know. I'm watching the bugs.
I'm watching the issue right now. Yeah, exactly.
I saw you bump that yesterday, and then said like it's so nice that I can kind of self-service in that manner and see what you guys are doing because everything's open source.
So that's been, I think, really validating. And I think we've also had folks that have been like, oh yeah, actually I pulled over a clone of this thing and I found, an issue in this, or I helped. So that's been, it's been, I think, really vindicating and validating on that.
One of my favorites was our customer was trying to run our CLI. We've downloaded a binary on some different version of Linux than the CLI had been built on. And so they just cloned the repo and rebuilt it, and they had it, which is not obviously the best user experience, but the fact that everything is out there means they are empowered to do those things, which is great.
Yeah, and I think all of this is to it's our empathy with folks that are running this thing. It's like we want to treat you the way we want to be treated. So that's been so far, and then we made a bunch of specific technical improvements too that have been really exciting, and to really improve that install time and really getting to the point where I think we're awfully close to this vision of being able to get this rack in, powered on, and provisioning VMs within hours. We're not that far off.
We were disappointed, and we would share the disappointment with the customers. Like, this 2.5 days,
right?
They're like, this is exponentially faster than any other installation and stand up we would do. And then of course we're like, yeah, I know, we're trying to get it to one day.
We wanted to get to
a
couple hours. Exactly. And and part of the blocker there is like, there is obviously a super important and complicated, frankly, interface in with the customer's network. And so there's a lot that can go wrong there. So one of the questions that was asked just in the chat here, if you had to build and ship the product again from scratch, what would you do differently?
Good question.
It's a really good question, and it's really hard to. I mean, I don't know. I feel that we
book our chamber time a little earlier for compliance.
That's true. Yeah.
Hire our EEs a little earlier. I don't know. I mean, I don't think there's anything glaring architecturally that we regret or that we could have done differently based on what we knew.
There is some super small stuff, but a lot of that stuff too, we actually got right on later iterations, and it would have been kind of, I guess, nicer to be able to. But I don't think it's really fair when you're going back and kind of thinking about that. I don't think you're allowed to like think omniscience. Right. We would have. I mean, like
we would have not gone down the path of using third-party stuff because we did a lot of investigation. And I mean, if we get beyond impression, we can go back and know that this is the wrong path, that we have to do this thing ourselves.
You got to go down those paths. I mean, I remember and that was a really tough time when you would, I remember like 2020 and it's the pandemic and everything else. And we're having like these kind of endless calls with prospective partners. And then like you would have a call that was a disaster. It was like, we definitely don't want to do work with this person ever, this company. And I remember Arian because we would do these calls after. You remember those calls? We would do these like debrief calls that you talk about therapy, where you'd be on one of these calls. It's like, oh my God, that was like, we had like, okay, GoToMeeting is terrible. And I would like say we had someone who had misconfigured GoToMeeting to be even worse.
I love your hot takes. LinkedIn, great. GoToMeeting, terrible.
That's right. That's right. Yes, exactly. I feel like these are my hot takes, circa 2005.
Right.
So. But this is, I don't know if you were on this meeting, but you would go to, the only way to unmute yourself was to use the keypad. And so you have to like *8 to unmute yourself. And then it would be like, you are unmuted. It's like, well, I'm also like, okay, but like the person I was going to interrupt or whatever, that's like, now the time has now passed. So it was, but I remember that like you'd get off these calls and like, oh my God, what a waste of time that was. And Arian I just remember him vividly saying, you know what? That was important. We had to do that because we had to, like, you could not have said that like these folks actually do make products that are kind of viable for us. And we didn't know they were turkeys until we got them on the phone. So it's like, we actually had to do that. We can cross them off the list. We never need to talk to them again, but we had to spend that 3 hours or 2 hours, whatever it was.
Yeah, the other one you could say is like, knowing that we absolutely could not build this off a reference design from a PCB perspective.
I was just saying the other thing I would like,
that's another one where it's like living that pain of that early start and then having to go kind of start from scratch again, not off a reference design, was super informative on the design we did. So, it's another one where it's like,
I think that this is actually a really important point you're making, Steve, in that and I'm sorry to say actually there, I don't mean to sound surprised, but just that when you spend time going down what turns out to be the wrong path, and then you get on the right path, it's hard to lament the time spent on the wrong path because that time gave you conviction about being on the right path. And there's so many of these things where it's like, yeah, we do not actually have a second. I mean, we do not wonder like, boy, should we have used OpenTitan? Boy, I wonder. It's like, nope, we definitely know that we should not have done that. But because we went down that path for long enough to know that was not going to be viable.
Hey, but didn't they just tape that thing out? I mean, come on.
That's right. We could almost be shipping.
That this is the hardware root of trust that we considered very, very seriously, but we're worried that it might not ship in time. And boy, was that right.
Yeah, that's right. A question in the chat, like, would you still do hardware virtualization if you're doing it over again? Absolutely, positively, no question.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, the hardware virtualization, you have to be just in a multi-tenant cloud. And obviously, I think, and there was like some people I think feel crestfallen because like, look, I've got some talks from back in the day talking about container-based virtualization and lamenting this kind of the fact that we are virtualizing twice in the stack. I still believe that. I still believe all that. But I also that hardware virtualized interface has been made. First of all, it's been made so fast by the microprocessors, and that's the interface that we've all settled on for cloud computing. And it's
I was just because I think the part of what you said too is really important though, which is like multi-tenant, which you may be like, wait, this isn't a public cloud, this is a private cloud. But like with our abilities to scope like silos between different parts of your organization, like you actually do need to treat your internal stuff as though it is multi-tenant, because like it is, even if your organization does own, it's like only things that are run by your company, but that doesn't mean your company is not like 12 companies in trench coat, right? So like
Right.
It is important to treat it that way, even if like you may not otherwise think so.
That's it. And I think that on hardware vert in particular, the reason that is required is because it does allow for it's this very well understood interface where you are allowing for a lot of flexibility in the side of that interface. So it's not just it's not just Linux. It's so you can run Windows, so you can run your own variant of Linux. We've got like lots of variants of Linux out there. I'm definitely learning way more about old distros of Linux than I thought I would. So it's hardware vert is important. So and in terms of the overhead, I mean, I think that the overhead there are still challenges certainly in terms of things like we do not over provision DRAM, we don't over provision CPU, but block storage performance. Happy to do that. People are asking about block storage performance. We can definitely we in general we need to talk a lot more about what we've done from a storage perspective, because that's
that feels like one of the follow-up deep dives.
Follow-up deep dives for sure. We spent a lot of time on it. It's super important. And so we've got a lot that we want to.
Of the ones that folks are interested in, one we already talked about. I'm not going to drag us back to fans, but just energy efficiency generally.
Right.
That is one that has it requires its own kind of deep dive. And then I think there is a networking one. Folks are pretty interested in both the hardware and the software side of networking and what it means to control it end to end. And storage is right up there.
And then another one that came up a bunch in the Hacker News comments, and just in general, is hey, what about a GPU? And we talked about this a bunch last time too. And we know there's a lot of energy around GPUs for sure right now. At the moment, I would say that we don't believe, and if, by the way, I know we've got some folks at NVIDIA that follow the company. It is our belief that we cannot build Oxide value on NVIDIA.
As it presently stands.
As it presently stands. We would love to be wrong. We would love it would be great for NVIDIA to say like, no, we would love to do something where, and by Oxide value, I mean real transparency and the ability to kind of to support arbitrary customer problems, to get visibility into power consumption, into firmware, into
security. So we have attestation from the lowest level, first initial instructions all the way up through firmware and operating system, et cetera.
Yep.
And we've got to be consistent on that value because it is security. It's another good one that we need to go deep on, because there's so many different elements of the system where that pulls through. But it would be wonderful. It'd be wonderful if there was an opportunity to build in the same way with the same openness, but today that's not possible.
That's right. So I think that we are looking to the future in a couple different ways. We talked about that we're very bullish on what AMD is doing, but we also know that we've talked to plenty of folks, and maybe you in the chat as well, you listener, may be of this same belief of like, look, it's interesting, but there's a software gap right now between the software, and I think that that's very real. So, and then I think the other thing we're very curious about is like, there are other things we can go do. AMD and NVIDIA are not the only two companies on the planet. And there are a bunch of interesting companies that can do silicon that we can do in some interesting ways, that we would be able to partner with and be able to get real Oxide value and kind of an open source stack. So, on that one, I can't say contact sales on that, but I guess contact engineering. What do we do on that? It's like
contact us.
Exactly, contact us. Another question was, do you have any regrets about the LPC55 S69, given that the number of vulnerabilities that Laura has found?
Better than the ones you haven't found.
And this is the chip that we use for our hardware root of trust.
Hardware root of trust. And I mean, regrets is a really strong word. I don't know. I don't think so. I think secure silicon is really, really, really hard. And I do think that we have spent a lot of time with this part, and I think we know it well. And we have been able to build a secure infrastructure on top of it. But it has, it is probably a dimension of the product that we are interested to know what else is out there, and we're constantly keeping it near to the rail.
I'm not mad, but just disappointed.
Not mad. I'm just disappointed. I am, and it's very challenging technically, and there is so much temptation in the industry to have this retreat to security through obscurity, and I just cannot emphasize this sharply enough. We need completely open stacks for this secure silicon, and so the fact that the bootloader is not open is a real problem. And I mean, Laura would be the first to tell you that, like, actually, if it had been open source, I might not have found this vulnerability, because I went to look for this vulnerability because I popped up Ghidra on this thing because I didn't have the source code. This is and that was the second vulnerability she found, not the first. I would like to see a lot more transparency from our vendors there, and a lot more openness. So no regrets, but yeah, as you say, Steve, I'm just disappointed. I'm not mad. Someone's asking about potential Cerebras Oxide collaboration. Definitely, that would be tantalizing. Cerebras it's a sibling company, wafer level silicon, really interesting company, and definitely tantalizing there. I would say no concrete plans, but that's something that folks are interested in.
Well, I mean, broadly, and it comes back to a question that, of course, came up in some of the Hacker News discussions, and certainly with reporters, which is like, oh, what are you doing about AI? Because no piece can get written today without talking about AI.
Right.
And our perspective continuing to form is that, first of all, there's this massive general purpose computing market that is in dire need of a better solution that brings the benefits of cloud computing on premises. And that still represents the vast majority of infrastructure that is being deployed and run everywhere outside of the public cloud. And so start there first. And we had customers continually say, like, please, 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 please go solve that first.
Right.
And actually wait until this like AI wave crests and then, deliver follow-on products that'll help support that. And I think one of the things that we anticipate is that this rush to smash a bunch of GPUs into systems right now to serve these like short-term needs are going to evolve into some real inefficiency problems around power and cooling and just data center density, where you're going to have these, quarter-filled racks and eighth-filled racks. And so I think as we are thinking about it, it is from a rack level.
Yeah, yes.
It's thinking about the right balance of hardware acceleration and general and just compute, and then the power and the thermals. And so same for a question of like, partnering with any of these other companies. It's like when you start thinking at the rack level, there are some pretty interesting opportunities.
There are, and there's some interesting opportunities, but there are also some interesting constraints on working together. And that's honestly, the way we see it right now is the battle lines are kind of being drawn because NVIDIA at the same time, and again, we'd love to be proven wrong on this, but NVIDIA is also like, actually, I'm eyeing that general purpose CPU, and I'm thinking, why don't I just take the whole thing? And instead of sitting out here on as a peripheral, like maybe I'm just the computer. And so I think the old like I'm the captain now meme with the GPU, and I think that's a proprietary world that we're not so into. I mean, I totally admire NVIDIA's execution and wish they were a much more transparent company. Make it much easier to interoperate. And in the meantime, I think we really will want to take a different tack, and one that is very much, Steve, as you're saying, taking that rack level approach. I did love, and Adam, you quoted the kind of the comments in the chat where someone's like, I really like the fact they didn't mention AI. Someone else like, yeah, that's because they don't have a GPU. They don't want to mention AI. They're hoping you don't mention AI, pal. Which is not wrong.
Not wrong, but again, like there is more computing happening in the universe than just AI, although it is consuming most of the power.
Absolutely. And we think that obviously this stuff is super important, but it's also, I think it's important to get this stuff on package. that right now it should not be a peripheral. It should be you should have a chiplet that is an accelerated chiplet, and that should live side by side with a chiplet that is a general purpose chiplet. And that is, the company, and I know that a couple folks see that. NVIDIA also sees that as the right model. But that's kind of what we see. Another question in the chat about, Wes, exactly, the MI300. What about ARM and RISC-V? So RISC-V, I love honor RISC-V. And there's a lot that's great about RISC-V. RISC-V really needs to figure out who it wants to kind of go after. And because there's a degree to which they kind of make whatever argument is convenient. And it's like, if you're going to go after Cortex-M, you really need to go after Cortex-M, and you really need to provide the debugging support and complete transparency, please. These proprietary firmware in RISC-V is a real problem. So I want RISC-V to not kind of repeat some of the mistakes that we've seen. RISC-V, we do not need UEFI. Please don't even contemplate it. In terms of ARM, also interesting, but same kind of comment for Ampere. It's like Ampere's slides look a lot less interesting when you compare them to AMD than you do when you compare them to Intel. So x86 is not just Intel; it's Intel and it's AMD, and obviously we're very long AMD. And some saying, are you talking about RISC-V or Sci-Fi? And that's part of the problem, is that Sci-Fi has got a lot of proprietary elements. It's been really problematic. And RISC-V has kind of allowed for some of those proprietary elements. So RISC-V is interesting. I believe it is Laura's. Adam, what was Laura's prediction about when we're going to get a data center caliber RISC-V part?
I think we're coming 2 years away now. Yeah, we're getting close.
Exciting.
Yeah, and I think the real thing is, like, we're going to listen to customers on that. There are lots and lots and lots of ways where Oxide is weird, too weird. Like, we want to be normal in some small number of ways, and choosing the x86-64 ISA is one of those small ways.
You sound like Pinocchio who wants to be a real boy. I just want to be normal. Oxide wants to be normal. We actually don't want to be a puppet. We want to be just a boy, just a little boy.
So the launch press was great. I'm sure you must have loved reading all of it. I mean, it seemed like broadly very positive, and a great milestone. But Steve and Brian, as you kind of think towards the future, are there milestones that you're looking forward to? And I know that this one was kind of both a starting line more than a finish line. But as you look over the horizon, are there points that you're excited about getting to in the future?
I think it isn't a particular date per se, but the thing that I'm excited about is just in these first deployments, we've been able to validate some of the promise for what it's like to take delivery and stand it up and get users going, and being able to hear from customers that this has been a real step function change in terms of how quickly they can go from something arriving to having developers productive has been great. The next thing I'm very much looking forward to is some of the other promised benefits that customers want to go validate. And that is, once I have moved off of the traditional rack and stack approach onto Oxide, was it really the case that I could collapse, 2 racks down to 1?
Right.
And is it the case that now product teams across these different divisions are much more productive or just happier, or we can recruit and retain folks more? Just some of those longer term benefits that I think these customers were excited to be part of why Oxide, having those come to fruition and then hearing them tell that story. I think that getting on the other side of that is something that I'm looking forward.
Yeah, and I think that also, kind of in the same vein, I think we've got such a great foundation, but it is a foundation, and we've got a lot of stuff now that we can go uniquely do. I mean, I know one of the things that I'm super stoked about is the ability to get like unprecedented network visibility. And there's so much stuff we can go build in terms of network observability, because we control both sides of this, and that can deliver just really eye-popping value. And that's going to be, I think, really, and there's just, I feel like at every part of the stack, there is now something we can go do that it was not really possible before. So I think that we are able to do things that really, really demonstrate the kind of the integrated nature of this system. And that's going to be really exciting. And I think that, you know, it's going to be, the journey is also going to be long on all this stuff. We did have, there was at some point, there was a suggestion, maybe from someone not at Oxide, that, but like, well, you need like an Our Incredible Journey blog post. And it's like, okay, maybe I'm too online, but I no, Our Incredible Journey, that's a eulogy. That's sorry. That's there's like an Our Incredible Journey Tumblr that is a collection of companies announcing that they're going out of business. So our journey is not an incredible journey. It is our magnificent trek. I don't know,
incredibly credible, very credible journey.
Very credible journey. Our entirely credible journey.
Yeah.
It you know, it's kind of funny because I know I'm at the same thing. You know, when you see that you've got these things that are in that kind of the distant horizon, and it takes so long to work there that sometimes you can forget like how you can, like, you don't feel necessarily the rush at the end, and you need to, like, because you're kind of looking to the next horizon now, and you do need to take a moment and be like, okay, this is like, this is pretty great. And now let's get excited about the next horizon. But I remember, I mean, Steve, I mean, how long ago was it? Me sitting in your office at Joyent, just really thinking like, man, what's it going to feel like when we close that first customer, get that first PO?
Lifetime ago and not long ago.
A lifetime ago, not long ago. And you think that like now that like that milestone now, which felt like it was so indefinitely in the future, pretty far in the rear view mirror at this point, that first PO. And that's pretty great. So pretty exciting, but a lot to go build. And a lot to go build, a lot to go do, for sure. So Adam, is that
this is great. Great. I mean, last week was so wild and great to kind of put a bookend on it, but then, you know, lots of work to do and look into the future. But, you know, worth taking the time to really savor this one, because it's been a long journey and we got a lot ahead. But this is great, and it's great to see people responding to it and excited about what we've built.
Yeah, I think that's a great note to end on, Adam, because I agree with you. I think that one thing, it was really surprising that this is now, like, whatever it is, the 231st most popular story in the history of Hacker News, in the 34 million articles in Hacker News. And the, you know, you think that this is, the things that are ahead of us are all involve death or scandal. And like that's...
You mean in terms of stories, not the future of the company? Yes, agreed.
Okay, sorry, no, you're not getting what I'm laying down. So we need, we need a scandal involving death. Come on, don't be thick. Like we can best it. We can best 231. But I think that's amazing that there's that kind of enthusiasm, because you don't generate that enthusiasm. Like that enthusiasm is like that comes from a deeper spot. And we feel just really lucky that folks find inspiration in what we're doing, but we're honestly, we're the ones that are really excited by the amount of enthusiasm that's out there. So all of you, you know, the folks that are, you know, I know there's not a home lab variant of Oxide, but we really, really appreciate all of your support and enthusiasm for the company and what we're doing. And we're excited to be a model for other folks who are willing to take on big, hard problems.
Awesome stuff.
All right. On that note, thank you very much, everyone. Really appreciate it. We're going to have, again, we'll do a couple more of these for sure. I know there's some questions in the chat that we didn't answer. I'll kind of hang out a bit in the chat and answer them. But thank you very much. And Adam, thank you. Steve, thank you for combat duty in the Hacker News comments. It was definitely it was a wild one. So
it is, but I do echo what you said about being really appreciative. Like, as much as it's fun to complain about the bad comments, just the fact that there's so many people that are so enthusiastic about what we're doing is just like it's very nice. I appreciate it quite a bit.
It really is. And, you know, when we first raised, we said we're going to have the internet rooting for us, and that's been great. It really, really, really appreciate it. So, all right. So, Steve, on to the next.
The next.
All right. thank you very much, everybody, and thanks again for all the terrific vibes. And we promise to never ask you to contact sales. Also, please contact sales.